Martha felt it before the knock came. The hairs on her arms rose in waves, her wolf stirring restlessly beneath her skin. Something unnatural pressed against the threshold of her home. Cold, ancient, wrong. Her instincts screamed a single word: danger. When she opened the door, her blood turned to ice. A vampire stood on her doorstep. He was tall, impossibly still in the way only the dead could be. Dark hair framed a face of such devastating beauty that for a heartbeat she forgot to breathe. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, blue as a winter sky, sharp and calculating as they studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Every warning her mother had ever whispered rushed through her mind like wildfire. Vampires are enemies of wolves, ancient enemies. If you see one, run. But Martha couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the wooden floor, her body betraying her even as her wolf snarled and clawed inside her chest. She needed an explanation. She needed to understand why their sworn enemy stood at her door in the fading evening light. At least the old laws still held. He couldn't enter without invitation. She was safe. She had to be safe. "Martha?" Kyle's voice came from behind her, and she turned, relief flooding through her. Her mate would know what to do. He would protect her. He would— "Oh, I forgot to mention," Kyle said, walking past her with an easy smile. "But Lord Victor is my guest." The world tilted. Guest? Since when did wolves invite vampires into their homes? Since when did they greet them like old friends instead of mortal enemies? "Please come in," Kyle said, and Martha's heart stopped as he stepped aside, gesturing the creature across their threshold. Lord Victor entered. The atmosphere shifted immediately, growing heavy and oppressive. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against Martha's lungs until each breath became a conscious effort. She braced herself for violence, for fangs flashing in the lamplight, for her throat being torn open, for Kyle's blood splashing across the walls. But the vampire only stood there, those piercing blue eyes never leaving her face, studying her, assessing her like a wolf might study prey before the hunt. If he were a wolf, that intense gaze might have warmed her. From him, it filled her with dread. "Martha," Kyle said, his tone casual, almost cheerful. "You belong to Lord Victor now." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Martha watched, numb with disbelief, as her mate accepted a heavy sack from the vampire's pale hands. The coins inside clinked with a sound that seemed to echo through her skull. "What?" The word came out barely a whisper. "What do you mean I belong to him?" Kyle set the sack on the table with a satisfied thump. "For 3 years, Martha, you've been unable to give me a pup. I thought it would be different with me when your parents handed you over, but—" He shrugged, not quite meeting her eyes. "You bring me shame. It's best you go with Victor to a faraway kingdom where your failure won't matter, where no one expects you to bear children." The floor seemed to drop away beneath her feet. "I'm doing you a favor," Kyle continued, his voice taking on that patient, reasonable tone he used when explaining things to children. "Really, when you think about it. Your parents approved. They understand." "Your parents approved. Of course they did." Martha's mind reeled backward through the years, through the pattern of rejection that had carved itself into her bones. She saw her parents' faces, the way their love had curdled into cold tolerance after her first failed mating. How their eyes had shone with pride when her first suitor came for her, a strong wolf from the Northern Territories. How that pride had turned to humiliation 5 years later when she returned, rejected and replaced by a woman who gave birth within months. Then came the second suitor, the third, the fourth. Each one promised patience. Each one eventually sent her back like defective goods. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, sharp and bitter. "Even dogs can bear multiple pups in one sitting, and yet you cannot produce one child." Martha had laughed at that. Actually laughed, though the sound had been broken and raw. If it was that easy, she'd thought, why didn't you birth more than just me? But she'd kept that thought to herself. She'd kept everything to herself. The shame, the hurt, the growing certainty that she was fundamentally broken in some essential way. By the time Kyle came courting, her parents hadn't been excited. They'd been eager, desperate to hand her off to anyone who would take her, to save face from the constant embarrassment of having an unworthy daughter. And Kyle had seemed different. He'd promised her situation didn't matter, that he would wait, that he loved her more than her barrenness. He'd lied. Kyle, Martha found her voice, though it shook. You promised, I know what I promised, he interrupted, already turning away from her. But 3 years is long enough. I've been patient, Martha. More patient than most would be. This is for your own good. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't break in front of them. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The vampire, Lord Victor, had remained silent throughout the exchange, but his gaze never wavered from her face. There was no cruelty in his expression, no triumph at acquiring property. If anything, she thought she detected pity? That was somehow worse than hatred would have been. It's time to go, Victor said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It held none of the mockery she expected, none of the gloating of a victor claiming his prize. Martha's legs faltered as she tried to move. The room spun. Kyle was already counting his coins, not even watching as she followed the vampire toward the door, toward a future she'd never imagined in her darkest nightmares. Outside, a magnificent black horse waited in the gathering dusk. Victor moved toward it with fluid grace, then turned back, offering his hand to help her mount. Martha jerked away from his touch. She could do this herself. She didn't need help from the creature who'd bought her like livestock, but when she tried to pull herself up into the saddle, her trembling legs betrayed her. She slipped, crying out as she lost her grip. Cold hands caught her, steadying her with surprising gentleness. The shock of Victor's touch sent shivers cascading down her spine. His skin was like ice, unnaturally cold, reminding her with every point of contact that he was dead, that she was being carried away by a walking corpse. But when she looked up into his face, she froze. He was breathtaking. There was no other word for it. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, those startling blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Nothing like the twisted monsters her kind painted in their cautionary tales. Nothing like the nightmare creatures parents used to frighten misbehaving pups. He was beautiful. Terribly, devastatingly beautiful. Victor helped her into the saddle, his movements efficient but not rough. Then he swung up behind her, his body a wall of cold at her back. When the horse began to move, she felt that coldness seeping through her clothes, through her skin, settling into her bones. They rode in silence, leaving her home, her prison behind. Through forests where the trees seemed to lean away from Victor's presence. Over hills where nightbirds fell silent at their passing. The landscape blurred around them, but Martha couldn't tear her thoughts away from the man at her back. The vampire, the king, her new owner. My kind will detect your wolf blood once we're near the fortress, Victor said suddenly, his breath cold against her ear. They'll come for you. To hide your scent, we need to bond through feeding. Martha's whole body went rigid. You want to mark me? I need to feed from your pulse point, on your neck. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was where he killed her. Vampires drank until their victims ran dry. Everyone knew that. They were parasites, monsters, demons in beautiful skin. As if sensing her terror, Victor leaned closer. The unnatural cold of him made her shiver. I'll only drink a little of your blood, nothing that will make you lose consciousness. The horse crested a hill, and Martha's breath caught. Below them sprawled a fortress of dark stone, its towers piercing the night sky like claws. Torchlight flickered in windows, but the light seemed wrong, too red, too hungry. This was the heart of the vampire kingdom, the northern fortress, a place her kind spoke of in whispers. Victor dismounted with inhuman grace, then reached up to help her down. His cold touch made her shiver again, and she saw something flicker in those blue eyes. Concern? No, that was impossible. "Who are you?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know Kyle?" "I am Victor, king of the Northern Court." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "That's all you need to know at the moment. What matters now is keeping you safe. The sooner we bond, the safer you become." Martha looked at the fortress below, then back at the vampire king, at the creature who'd bought her, who claimed he wanted to keep her safe, even as he prepared to sink his fangs into her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something other than bare her neck for a monster. But where would she run? Back to Kyle, who'd sold her for coin. Back to her parents, who'd approved the transaction. Back to a pack that had never wanted her in the first place. Slowly, hands trembling, Martha pulled aside her hair and tilted her head, exposing the vulnerable column of her throat. Victor stepped closer. His cold breath feathered across her skin as he found her pulse point. Martha squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for pain, for death, for... The pierce of fangs was sharp and quick, but what followed wasn't agony. The sensation that flooded through her was overwhelming, like nothing she'd ever experienced. Heat bloomed where his mouth touched her skin, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. It was nothing like the marking between wolves, no pain, no burning claim of ownership. This was something else entirely, something that made her knees weak and her breath catch. A moan escaped her lips before she could stop it. Her hands flew up, clutching at his cloak for balance as pleasure rolled through her in waves. This was wrong. This shouldn't feel good. He was a vampire, a corpse, her enemy. But her body didn't care about logic. Neither did her wolf, which had fallen eerily silent instead of raging as it should. Victor lingered at her throat, his lips grazing the bite mark, and Martha felt her face flush with heat that had nothing to do with blood loss. When he finally pulled away, his hands steadied her as her legs threatened to give out. She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't bear to see what he might read in her flushed face, in her rapid breathing, in the way she still gripped his cloak. "I'll need to do that regularly," Victor said, his voice rougher than before, "to keep the bond active." Martha nodded, not trusting her voice. She should be terrified, should be planning escape, should be anything except wanting him to do it again. The sensation lingered on her skin like a drug, and Martha felt something inside her shift. Something dangerous and foolish and entirely unwanted. As they descended toward the fortress, Martha's senses were overwhelmed by the press of vampire presence. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. All ancient, all powerful, all potential threats. Victor led her through the massive gates, through corridors of dark stone where torchlight cast dancing shadows. Vampires watched from doorways and alcoves, their eyes tracking her with predatory interest. But none approached. They all kept their distance, and Martha realized with a jolt that they were afraid of Victor. He wasn't just a vampire. He was their king. Finally, they stopped before an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Another vampire, but one whose presence felt less threatening somehow. "Helen," Victor said, and the warmth in his voice surprised Martha. "This is Martha. She'll be staying with us." Helen's eyes widened slightly as she looked between them, then settled on Martha with something like wonder. "Lord Victor doesn't bring humans here." She smiled, soft and genuine. "You must be special." Martha couldn't find words to respond. She looked back at Victor, searching his face for some explanation, some clue to what was happening. But his expression was unreadable as he watched her, those blue eyes holding secrets she couldn't begin to guess. "Take care of her," Victor said to Helen, then turned to leave. Martha felt a sudden, irrational urge to call him back, to demand more answers, to understand why her wolf had gone so quiet in his presence, why his bite had felt like pleasure instead of pain, why he looked at her like she mattered when everyone else had decided she didn't. But the words died in her throat. The massive fortress doors closed behind them with a sound like a death knell, sealing her inside with the very creatures she'd been taught to fear since childhood. And as Martha stood in that cold stone corridor, surrounded by vampires and impossibilities, she realized with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same. She'd been sold to a monster, but she was beginning to suspect the real monsters were the ones she'd left behind. Helen led Martha through winding corridors of dark stone, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The fortress was a maze of shadows and flickering torchlight, beautiful in its severity. Finally, they stopped before a heavy wooden door. "This will be your room," Helen said, pushing it open. Martha stepped inside and her breath caught. The chamber was vast, far larger than anything she'd ever called her own. Tall windows overlooked snow-covered hills that stretched endlessly into the night. Moonlight painted everything silver, beautiful and cold. So cold. The chill bit into her bones immediately, making her shiver. Of course, vampires had no need for warmth. "I'll get the hearth started," Helen said, already moving toward the massive fireplace that dominated one wall. Martha watched in surprise as the elderly vampire knelt before the hearth, arranging kindling with practiced efficiency. "You don't have to." "Nonsense!" Helen struck flint to steel, coaxing flames to life. "Just because we don't need heat doesn't mean you should suffer without it." The simple kindness made Martha's throat tighten. She'd expected hatred here. Disgust. The barely concealed contempt she'd grown accustomed to from her own kind. Instead, this vampire showed her more consideration than her own mate had in 3 years. "Thank you," Martha whispered. Helen smiled, and the expression transformed her face. "You're welcome here, child. Rest. Tomorrow will help you settle in." But Martha couldn't rest. Her mind churned with too many questions, too many fears. When Helen returned the next morning with bread and warm broth, Martha found herself following the older woman through the fortress, desperate for something to occupy her hands and quiet her thoughts. "You don't have to work," Helen said, but her eyes were kind. "Lord Victor didn't bring you here to be a servant." "Then why did he bring me here?" Martha asked. Helen paused, considering. "That's his story to tell, but I can show you what we do if you'd like to help." So Martha worked alongside Helen, learning the rhythms of the fortress. She helped prepare meals for the few mortals who served in the court. She mended linens and swept floors, and did all the mundane tasks that kept even a vampire stronghold functioning. And slowly, Helen began to talk. "Victor finds them," she said one afternoon as they folded blankets. "The strays, the abandoned ones, children left to die in the cold or cast out by their villages." Her voice grew soft. "He gives them a choice, death or a second chance through vampire blood." Martha's hands stilled. "He turns children? Only to save them, never for sport or cruelty." Helen's eyes grew distant. "I was one of them, you know. Centuries ago. I suffered terrible sickness. My family left me in the woods to die." She touched her chest absently. "Victor found me, offered me a choice. I chose life, even if it meant life as this." "Do you regret it?" Martha asked quietly. Helen was silent for a long moment. Some days I would give anything to be mortal again. To feel the sun without pain. To grow old with people I love. To die peacefully instead of watching everyone I care about turn to dust." She shook her head. But Victor gave me centuries I wouldn't have had. He gave me purpose. I can't regret that entirely. Over the following days, Martha met the children Helen spoke of. They appeared cautiously at first, watching her with wide, wary eyes. Some looked no older than 5 or 6. Others might have been 10 or 12 when they were turned. All of them carried the preternatural stillness of vampires, but their eyes held a vulnerability that broke Martha's heart. "Will she hurt us?" a small girl whispered to Helen. "No, sweet one. Martha is our guest. She's safe." The girl, Ilara, Helen called her, crept closer, studying Martha with intense curiosity. "You smell different, warm." Martha knelt down to her level. "I'm a wolf. Have you ever seen a wolf?" Ilara shook her head, then surprised Martha by reaching out to touch her hand. "You're so warm," she breathed, wonder lighting her young face. After that, the ice slowly broke. The children began seeking Martha out, drawn to her warmth in ways that went beyond the physical. She read them stories, played simple games, let them curl against her while she worked, soaking in body heat they could no longer produce themselves. And for the first time in her life, Martha felt truly accepted. Not tolerated, not pitied. Accepted. These creatures who should have been her enemies showed her more kindness than her own pack ever had. But the peace couldn't last. One evening, a boy named Thomas asked her a question that changed everything. "Martha, will I ever grow up?" She looked at his earnest face, frozen at perhaps 9 years old, and her heart cracked. "What do you mean?" "I've been here 10 years, he said matter-of-factly. "I'm still the same. I can't get taller, can't get older." His small hand clutched hers. "Will I ever grow up?" Martha looked at Helen, desperate for the right words, but the older vampire's expression held only sorrow. "No, sweet boy," Helen said gently. "You won't. None of you will." The full horror of it hit Martha like a physical blow. These children would remain children forever, trapped in small bodies while centuries passed. They would never know adolescence, never experience first love, never grow into the adults they were meant to become. It was a different kind of death, perhaps crueler than the one Victor had saved them from. That night, Martha's wolf paced restlessly inside her, whining with distress. Every maternal instinct she possessed screamed to help these children, to fix this terrible wrong. But how? What could she possibly do against an ancient curse? She understood now why Victor had brought her here. He'd somehow seen this in her. This desperate need to nurture, to protect, to love the broken and unwanted. Just like her. Days blurred together in a strange new routine. Martha fell into the rhythms of the fortress, finding peace in work and purpose in caring for the children. But something else grew during those days. Something she tried desperately to ignore. She never saw Victor. Oh, she heard about him. The children spoke of him with reverence and love. Helen mentioned him in passing. Council meetings, territory disputes, matters of state that kept the vampire king occupied. But he never appeared in the common areas where Martha worked, never joined them for the evening meals she helped prepare. It was as if he was deliberately avoiding her. But at night, everything changed. The first time Martha felt it, she dismissed it as imagination. A heavy presence in her room, watching from the shadows near the window. She'd opened her eyes, heart pounding, but found only darkness and the dying embers of her fire. The second night, she felt it again. Stronger this time. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. Heat flooding through her veins, her skin growing hypersensitive, her breath quickening. She sat up, searching the shadows. Victor? No answer. But she knew. Gods help her. She knew he was there. By the 5th night, it was happening every evening. That presence in the darkness, watching, waiting. and her body betrayed her every time. Heat. Need. A hunger that had nothing to do with food, and everything to do with the vampire king who marked her throat. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself aching for more. Her wolf, which should have been raging at a vampire's proximity, only paced and whined, wanting, needing, craving something it shouldn't desire. The addiction was consuming her. On the 7th morning, Martha's patience snapped. She'd barely slept, too aware of that watching presence, too frustrated by Victor's games. She searched the fortress until she found him in a corridor near the council chambers, discussing something with another vampire. "Lord Victor," she called, her voice sharp. "I need to speak with you." The other vampire's eyes widened at her tone, but Victor merely dismissed him with a gesture. When they were alone, he turned to her with that infuriatingly calm expression. "Yes?" "Stop." Martha crossed her arms, fury and something darker burning in her chest. "Stop coming to my room at night. Stop watching me like I'm some kind of experiment. If you're going to avoid me during the day, then stay away entirely." "The bond is affecting you," Victor said, his voice carefully neutral. "Making you feel things that aren't..." "Lies!" The word burst from her. "You invade my privacy every night, but you won't show yourself. You won't talk to me. You treat me like I'm nothing during the day, but at night." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Stay away from me if you only come when you need me." She turned to leave. Done with this conversation. Done with him. Victor's hand closed around her wrist. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. He pulled her back, drawing her close, and suddenly she was pressed against the cold wall of his chest. His other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward his. "I can perceive your scent," he said, his voice rough. "Soon others will too. We need to renew the bond." His eyes dropped to her lips, and Martha's breath caught. This close, she could see flecks of silver in that impossible blue. Could feel the unnatural coldness of him radiating against her heated skin like opposing magnets. Different, wrong, but somehow perfectly aligned. She closed her eyes, certain he would kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and led her to her room. The moment the door closed, Victor's composure seemed to crack. He crossed to her with inhuman speed, one hand sliding into her hair as he tilted her head to expose her throat. "This is necessary," he said, but his voice shook. "Only to maintain the bond." Then his fangs pierced her skin. This time, Martha didn't try to hide her response. She clutched at him, her fingers digging into his shoulders as that overwhelming sensation crashed through her. It was pleasure and pain and something deeper, something that reached into her very soul and pulled. "Gods!" she gasped, and the word came out almost like a prayer. Victor lingered at her throat, his lips moving against her skin in a way that couldn't be purely functional. Martha felt her knees weaken, felt heat pooling low in her belly, felt every nerve ending in her body come alive with want. She wanted more than the bite, more than this careful, controlled feeding. She wanted him, all of him, despite every rational thought screaming that this was wrong. When Victor finally pulled away, she saw the struggle in his eyes, saw him fighting to step back, to maintain distance. But Martha's hands were still fisted in his shirt, holding him close. "Stay," she whispered. "We need to find a way to mask what you're feeling." His voice was hoarse. "Because it's not real, Martha. The bond is..." "Stop blaming the bond," she interrupted. "Stop pretending you don't feel it too." "My kind is dangerous to yours," he said, but he hadn't moved away. "You shouldn't get comfortable here. Shouldn't trust this. Shouldn't trust me." But Martha could see it in his eyes, the barely controlled desire, the longing he was desperately trying to suppress. He was resisting her, and it was tearing him apart. Before she could respond, Victor vanished. One moment he was there, solid and real under her hands. The next, only empty air remained. He'd moved so fast that the displacement of air made her stumble. Martha stood alone in her room, touching the mark on her neck, her body still thrumming with unfulfilled need. Her wolf paced restlessly inside her, whining for the vampire who'd fled. Later that evening, Helen found Martha in the kitchens, aggressively kneading bread dough. "I haven't seen Victor affected by anyone before," Helen said quietly, settling onto a stool nearby. "The way you unsettle him, it's unprecedented." Martha's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "He's ancient, child, centuries old. Nothing shakes him. Nothing makes him lose control." Helen's eyes were knowing. "But you do. Whatever this is between you, it terrifies him. That's why he runs." "He shouldn't run," Martha said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "If he's going to mark me, if he's going to invade my space and make me feel these things, then he shouldn't be a coward about it." Helen's laugh was startled. "No one has ever called Lord Victor a coward. Then he shouldn't act like one." But the nights only grew worse. That presence in her room became more intense, more frequent. Martha would wake feeling as if Victor's hands had been in her hair, his lips at her throat, his cold body pressed against hers. The line between dreams and reality blurred until she couldn't tell which were which. The addiction was destroying her. She needed him, craved him with an intensity that terrified her. One night, Martha couldn't bear it anymore. She threw off her blankets and stalked through the dark corridors until she found Victor's study. Candlelight flickered beneath the door. He was awake, working, probably, while she was falling apart. She didn't bother knocking. Victor looked up from the papers spread across his desk, surprise flashing across his face. "Martha, what are you doing to me?" The words came out as almost a scream. She crossed the room until she stood before his desk, her hands clenched into fists. "What spell have you cast? What vampire trick is this?" "There's no spell." He stood slowly, watching her with wary eyes. "The bond. Stop. Stop blaming everything on the bond." Martha moved around the desk, driven by a need she couldn't name. "Why do you only come to me in the dark? When I'm vulnerable? When I'm alone?" "The bond is affecting you." "Then why does it affect you too?" she challenged. "I see it in your eyes. I feel it in the way you touch me when you feed. You want this as much as I do, but you're too afraid to admit it." "Martha." Her name was a warning. "You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" She closed the distance between them, watching his eyes widen, watching ancient, powerful Victor actually take a step back from her. "Pull away if you must. Use your vampire speed. Run like you've been running." But he didn't move. For the first time since she'd met him, the Vampire King stood frozen, unable to flee. Martha reached up and pulled his face down to hers. The kiss was desperate, consuming, everything she'd been craving. Victor made a sound low in his throat. Surprise or surrender, she couldn't tell. But then his arms came around her, pulling her against him. His lips moved against hers with a hunger that matched her own, his cold hands sliding into her hair. "You don't know what you're doing," he gasped between kisses. "I know exactly what I want," Martha breathed against his mouth. For several heartbeats, they were lost in each other. Victor kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and water and salvation all at once. His control shattered completely, hands roaming over her back, her waist, pulling her impossibly closer despite the layers of clothing between them. Then suddenly he staggered. Victor broke the kiss, his eyes going wide with confusion. He took a step back and nearly fell, catching himself on the edge of his desk. "Victor?" Martha reached for him. "I don't—" He shook his head as if trying to clear it. "Something's wrong." His face had flushed, actually flushed, with color that shouldn't exist in a vampire's pallid features. He pressed a hand to his chest, breathing harder than any undead creature should. "Leave," he said, His voice strained. "Martha, you need to leave." "You're unwell. Leave." But before she could move toward the door, Victor's legs gave out entirely. He slumped into his chair, his head falling back, consciousness flickering across his face like a dying candle. Terror seized Martha's heart. "Helen!" she screamed. "Helen, help!" The elderly vampire appeared within seconds, her preternatural speed carrying her across the fortress in a blur. But when she saw Victor, pale, struggling to stay conscious, his chest rising and falling in a way no vampires should, her face went white with shock. "What did you do?" Helen's voice was cold as winter. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing. We just kissed, and then he..." "Kissed?" Helen rounded on her, fangs bared for the first time since Martha had arrived. "You kissed him? I haven't seen him like this in centuries. You must have done something." "I didn't mean, he is all we have," Helen snarled, and Martha had never seen such fury in those usually kind eyes. "He has kept us safe, given us purpose, been our king and our savior. I will choose protecting him over keeping you safe. So if you're responsible for this, you better have a solution." The words hit like physical blows. Martha staggered back, feeling the ground shifting beneath her feet once more. For a brief, beautiful moment, she'd been accepted here. Valued, wanted. Now, once again, she was the problem. The broken thing that destroyed everything she touched. "I'll find a solution," Martha whispered. "I swear it." But Helen had already dismissed her, kneeling beside Victor and murmuring words Martha couldn't hear. Days passed like a waking nightmare. Victor remained confined to his chambers, drifting in and out of consciousness. Helen tried everything, offering him blood from their stores, but he choked on it, his body rejecting what should have sustained him. Ancient remedies, whispered spells, nothing worked, and Martha wasn't allowed near him. She stood outside his door sometimes, listening to Helen's worried murmurs, to Victor's labored breathing. Each sound was a knife in her heart. The children sensed something wrong. They grew quiet, clinging to Martha for comfort even as she felt herself falling apart. How could she comfort them when she was the cause of their beloved king's suffering? Worse, her scent was fading. Martha noticed it on the 4th day, the way other vampires in the fortress began watching her more closely, the way their nostrils flared when she passed. Victor's mark was wearing off, and without him conscious enough to renew it, she was becoming vulnerable. She had perhaps 2 days before her wolf blood called to them like a dinner bell. On the 5th morning, Martha made her decision. She couldn't stay here, couldn't watch Victor die while Helen blamed her, couldn't wait to be torn apart by vampires who could no longer smell their king's claim on her. She had to find help. Somewhere. Somehow. When she announced her intention to leave, Helen laughed bitterly. "Of course, just like your kind. Leaving when things get difficult." "I'm leaving to find a cure," Martha said, pulling on her cloak. "I won't watch him die." "You should have thought of that before you..." Helen's voice broke. "Just go. You've done enough damage." The words cut deep, but Martha swallowed them down. She'd been swallowing cruel words her whole life. What was one more set? She walked out of the fortress just as dawn was breaking, the sky painted in shades of gray and pink. Snow covered the ground in a pristine blanket, beautiful and deadly. She had no destination, no real plan, just a desperate hope that somewhere in this frozen wilderness she might find answers. Behind her, the fortress disappeared into the morning mist, and Martha walked alone into the snow, leaving sanctuary and temptation behind, carrying only hope and determination in her heart. She would save Victor, or die trying. The snow was relentless. Martha trudged through drifts that reached her knees, each step a battle against the frozen wilderness. Her cloak did little to shield her from the biting wind that cut through fabric and flesh alike. She had no destination, No map, no plan beyond the desperate hope that somewhere in this white wasteland she might find answers. Victor was dying, and it was her fault. Hours blurred together. The sun climbed higher, though it brought no warmth. Martha's legs burned with exhaustion, her lungs ached from breathing the frigid air, but she pushed forward. What choice did she have? She couldn't return empty-handed to watch the Vampire King fade, while Helen's hatred burned in her eyes. Just when Martha thought she might collapse into the snow and never rise, she saw it, a thin trail of smoke rising into the gray sky. A cottage. She stumbled toward it, hope flaring in her chest. The small structure sat nestled against a rocky outcropping, its thatched roof heavy with snow. Warm light glowed in the windows, promising shelter and perhaps, if she was lucky, guidance. Martha knocked, her frozen fingers barely able to form a fist. The door opened almost immediately, revealing an old woman with silver hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. She took one look at Martha, snow-covered, shivering, desperate, and stepped aside without a word. "Come in, child, quickly now before you freeze." The warmth inside hit Martha like a physical force. A hearth blazed cheerfully in the center of the single room, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with dried herbs and strange bottles. The woman guided Martha to a chair near the fire and pressed a cup of something hot and fragrant into her trembling hands. "Drink. It will help." Martha obeyed, the liquid burning pleasantly down her throat, spreading warmth through her limbs. Only when she drained the cup did the woman settle into the chair across from her, studying Martha with unsettling intensity. "What?" the woman asked softly. "Is a wolf doing alone in these frozen lands, so far from her pack?" The question, asked with such simple kindness, broke something inside Martha. The whole story came tumbling out. Kyle's betrayal and the sack of coins, Victor buying her like property, the marking that felt like pleasure instead of pain, the fortress full of lost children and unexpected acceptance, the kiss that made Victor collapse, Helen's fury, and her own desperate flight into the wilderness. "He's dying," Martha finished, her voice cracking, "and I don't know how to save him. But I can't just watch him fade. I can't." The old woman sat frozen for a long moment, her eyes wide with shock. Then she stood abruptly, crossing to a shelf and pulling down an ancient journal. Its leather cover was cracked with age, its pages yellowed and fragile. "Tell me again," the woman demanded, flipping through the book with shaking hands. "The vampire, this Victor, he marked you to protect you? To hide your scent from others of his kind?" "Yes." "And you felt drawn to him? Beyond logic? Beyond the natural enmity between your kinds?" Martha nodded, heat flooding her cheeks at the memory. "And when you kissed him, truly kissed him, he weakened? Became feverish?" "Yes." "How did you—" The woman found what she was seeking and stabbed a finger at the page, triumph and wonder warring on her weathered face. "It's real. By the old gods, it's actually real." "What's real? Please, I need to understand." The woman turned the journal toward Martha, though the ancient script was indecipherable. "What you've described is uncommon, nearly forgotten. Most thought it merely legend." She looked up, her eyes bright. When a vampire falls in love with a wolf, truly loves her, and feeds from her with the intent to protect rather than consume, the act breaks the curse of immortality. Martha's breath caught. "What?" "Victor is becoming human, child. The vampire curse is unraveling. His body is remembering what it means to be mortal." The woman's voice grew urgent. "And it's not just him. Through your combined blood, you can save every vampire in that fortress. You can give them the choice to be human again." "But he's dying." "Because he doesn't understand what's happening. His body is rejecting vampire sustenance because it no longer needs it." The woman stood, already gathering supplies, dried herbs, wrapped bread, preserved foods. He needs human nourishment now, simple food, broth, bread, anything that feeds mortal flesh. Hope blazed so bright in Martha's chest it was almost painful. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. This prophecy was spoken centuries ago. I was banished from my coven for believing it, for speaking of a time when the ancient curses would be broken by love between enemies." She pressed the bundle of supplies into Martha's arms. "I've lived my whole life waiting to see this moment. Now go. Hurry back and feed him. Once he eats, his strength will return." "How can I ever thank you?" The woman smiled, and for a moment, she looked young despite her aged features. "You already have. I was meant to witness this prophecy fulfilled. That is thanks enough." Her expression turned urgent. "But hurry, child, before it's too late." Martha ran. The supplies felt heavy in her arms, but she barely noticed. Her legs, which had been leaden with exhaustion, now flew over the snow. Less than 2 days remained before her scent would betray her completely. Less than 2 days before the vampires who couldn't smell Victor's claim would view her as prey. But more than fear drove her. Love did. The desperate, fierce need to save the man who'd seen her worth when no one else had. The fortress appeared in the distance, its dark towers stark against the afternoon sky. Martha's heart pounded as she approached the gates, bursting through them with enough force to startle the guards. Helen stood in the courtyard, and when she saw Martha, her face twisted with cold fury. "Did you return because you're freezing?" Helen's voice dripped venom. "Couldn't survive out there, traitor? Come crawling back to the warmth?" "Helen," Martha gasped, trying to catch her breath. "He's worse, much worse. And you have the audacity to show your face here?" Martha dropped the supplies and grabbed Helen's shoulders, shaking her hard enough to make the vampire's eyes widen in surprise. "Listen to me. You're scared of losing him. I understand that. I'm scared too." Her voice broke. "I love him, Helen. I love Victor, and I won't let anything happen to him." "Love?" Helen laughed bitterly. "You barely know him. And yet I walked into a frozen wilderness to find a way to save him." Martha's grip tightened. "You want to be human again? You want to feel the sun without pain? To grow old? To die in peace? I have a way. But you need to trust me." Helen stared at her, searching her face for deception. Finding only desperate sincerity, her expression shifted from fury to fragile hope. "What are you talking about?" "Let me try, please. Whatever I'm doing, whatever you think I'm doing, let me see him. Let me try to save him." Martha's eyes burned with unshed tears. "What other choice do we have?" A long moment passed, then Helen's shoulders sagged. "Whatever you're doing, make it work, before the others realize what's happening to him, before they panic." She picked up Martha's supplies, eyeing them with confusion. "What is all this?" "Food, human food." Martha was already moving toward the fortress. "I'll explain everything, but first we save Victor." They ran through the corridors, Helen's supernatural speed forcing Martha to sprint to keep up. When they reached Victor's chambers, Martha's heart nearly stopped. He looked like death itself. The mighty vampire king lay in his bed, his skin gray and slick with sweat. His chest rose and fell in labored breaths that rattled in his lungs. But most shocking of all, his body was burning with fever. Where once he'd been cold as ice, now heat radiated from him in waves. "Victor," Martha whispered, moving to his side. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Martha? You shouldn't. Others will sense. Hush, save your strength." She turned to Helen. "I need a pot, water, a fire, quickly." While Helen gathered supplies, Martha unpacked the food the witch had given her. She prepared a simple broth, adding herbs and bread to soften in the hot liquid. The smell filled the room, warm, savory, utterly human. Victor's nose twitched, his eyes focused slightly. "What is that?" he rasped. "Food, real food. You need to eat." Martha lifted his head gently, bringing the spoon to his lips. "Trust me." He tried to turn away. "Vampires don't. You're not just a vampire anymore. Please, Victor, trust me." Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was the fever clouding his judgment. Or perhaps, on some level, he knew she was right. Victor parted his lips and let her feed him. The first spoonful made him cough. The second went down easier. By the third, he was eating with something close to hunger. Helen watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Martha fed him slowly, carefully, broth and softened bread, warm and nourishing. With each spoonful, she watched color return to Victor's gray skin, watched his breathing ease, watched the terrible pallor recede as if the food was medicine flowing through his veins. After several minutes, Victor's hand came up to grasp the bowl himself. He drank the remaining broth in long swallows, his eyes clearing with each moment that passed. When he finally set the bowl aside, his hand found Martha's, no longer ice-cold, warm, impossibly wonderfully warm, and beneath her fingers, pressed to his wrist, she felt it, a heartbeat. "Helen," Martha breathed, not taking her eyes from Victor. "Feel his pulse." The elderly vampire moved forward as if in a dream. Her fingers found Victor's throat, and her eyes widened with wonder. "Your heart. Victor, your heart is beating." "How?" Victor's voice was stronger now, confused but no longer weak. "What's happening to me?" Martha explained everything, the witch in the snow, the ancient prophecy, the breaking of the immortality curse. "When you fed from me to protect me, when you fell in love with me, it changed you. It's changing you. You're becoming human again." "Human," Victor repeated, as if testing the word. "And not just you." Martha looked at Helen. "Through your blood and mine together, we can offer the same choice to every vampire who wants it. Freedom, mortality, the chance to live and love and eventually die in peace." Helen's hands trembled as they pressed against her own chest. "I could be human again?" "If you choose it." Martha stood, moving to Helen's side. "It's your choice, your freedom." Helen looked at Victor, seeking permission. He nodded weakly, understanding in his eyes. "Do it," Helen whispered. "Please." They prepared the ritual carefully. Victor's blood, still containing traces of his vampire nature, mixed with Martha's wolf blood. Helen drank it reverently, as if it were the most precious wine. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Helen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Color bloomed in her cheeks. Her skin, which had been pale and cold for centuries, began to warm. And in the silence of the room, they heard it. The tentative, uncertain beating of a heart that had been still for longer than Martha had been alive. Helen sobbed, pressing both hands to her chest, feeling that impossible rhythm. "I'm alive. After all these centuries, I'm alive again." Word spread through the fortress like wildfire. Vampires gathered outside Victor's chambers, their voices a mixture of hope and disbelief. Martha stood before them, no longer a captive or a curiosity, but something else entirely. A savior. "Those who wish to be human again may choose," Victor announced, his voice still weak but growing stronger. "There is no shame in either path. This is freedom, to remain as you are or to embrace mortality once more." One by one, vampires knelt before Martha. Some wept as they drank the mixture of blood. Others laughed with joy as their hearts remembered how to beat. Still others chose to remain immortal, and that was honored too. For the first time in centuries, the curse of immortality became a choice rather than a prison. But as night fell and the celebrations continued, Martha returned to Victor's chambers. He sat by the window, staring out at the snowy hills, one hand pressed to his chest where his heart now beat steadily. "I should return to my own room," Martha said softly from the doorway. "Don't." The word was quiet but firm. Stay. She crossed to him, and when he reached for her hand, she took it without hesitation. His fingers were warm, alive, human. I need to tell you the truth, Victor said, about why I really bought you. Martha settled beside him, waiting. I wasn't looking for a wife or a servant. I was searching for someone to care for the children, to give them what I couldn't. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Merchants who traveled through my kingdom carried news to your lands. They spoke of you, of a wolf woman rejected by multiple mates, deemed worthless because she couldn't bear children. Martha flinched, old wounds aching. But they also spoke of how hard you worked, how you threw yourself into every task trying to prove your worth, how you cared for others even when no one cared for you. Victor turned to face her fully. I'd been observing you, Martha, long before I came to your door, and I saw what your people couldn't, that your worth had nothing to do with bearing children, that your heart was bigger than theirs, that you had exactly what my lost children needed. You came for me, Martha whispered, not for what I could give you, but for who I already was. Yes. He cupped her face gently. I came for you, Martha. Only you. The kiss was different this time. No desperation, no fear of collapse. Just two people finding each other in the darkness, choosing each other despite every reason they shouldn't. Victor stood, drawing her up with him. Stay with me tonight. Not because of any bond or curse or prophecy, but because I want you. Because I choose you. I choose you too, Martha breathed. Their lovemaking was slow, reverent, healing. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. Victor's hands, now warm instead of cold, traced her body with worship. He saw her, truly saw her, not as broken or deficient, but as whole and perfect exactly as she was. And Martha, who had only ever known perfunctory matings with men who tolerated her at best, finally understood what it meant to be desired, to be chosen, to be loved for herself rather than what she could provide. Your kind is not as bad as the picture mine painted of you, she murmured against his chest afterward, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Victor laughed softly, his arms tightening around her. There is always a good and bad side of everything, in every kind. The next morning, Victor ate breakfast with visible appetite. Bread, eggs, fruit. Each bite seemed to strengthen him further. Helen, her own transformation continuing, watched with joy shining in her eyes. I volunteer to continue helping, she announced. I want every vampire who chooses mortality to experience this miracle. Over the following days and weeks, Victor and Martha established a system. Vampires came to them, and those who chose mortality received their blood. The transformations were slow but steady. Cold bodies warming, still hearts beginning to beat. Immortal flesh remembering what it meant to age. The children were the most miraculous. Thomas, frozen at 9 years old for a decade, began to grow. His clothes needed letting out. His voice started to crack. He and the other children would finally know adolescence, adulthood, the full arc of mortal life. Helen aged gracefully, joy in every new line that appeared on her face. I'm going gray, she announced one morning, touching her hair with wonder. I'm actually going gray. The fortress became a place where mortal and immortal lived side by side, bound not by curse but by choice and community. And Martha's body began to change in ways that shocked her to her core. At first, she dismissed it. The fatigue, the way certain smells made her nauseated. But as weeks turned to months, the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. The impossible was happening. The woman told she would never bear children was carrying new life. Victor's wonder matched her own. He became fiercely protective, hovering near her as her belly swelled. The children, now growing themselves, buzzed with excitement about the babies coming. Babies, plural. Because Martha wasn't carrying one child, but two. twins. Helen served as midwife when the time came, the circle completing itself beautifully. The birth was long and difficult, but when Martha finally held her son and daughter, both perfect and squalling with life, she wept. The children she'd raised rushed in to meet their new siblings. Thomas, now gangly with teenage growth, carefully held the baby girl. Ilara, growing into a young woman, cooed at the baby boy. This was family. Not bound by blood alone, but by choice and love and the breaking of ancient curses. 2 years passed in a blur of joy and transformation. The fortress thrived, a beacon of hope. Martha's twins grew strong and healthy, showing traits of both wolf and vampire heritage in fascinating ways. The older children became adults, some even starting families of their own. Helen, fully mortal now, embraced her mortality with grace. Gray streaked her hair liberally, wrinkles mapped her face, and she'd never looked happier. The knock came on an afternoon in late spring. Martha was in Victor's private court, nursing her twins, when a guard announced a visitor. A wolf from the southern territories, demanding an audience with the vampire king, offering payment. Martha's blood ran cold when Kyle walked in. He looked older, worn. Guilt and regret carved lines in his face that hadn't been there 2 years ago. His eyes found her immediately, and she watched shock ripple across his features. Martha sat in a chair that was practically a throne, nursing 2 infants while children played at her feet. She wore fine clothes, her hair arranged elaborately, a queen in truth. Martha. Her name came out strangled. Victor stood beside her, one warm hand on her shoulder. State your business. Kyle tore his gaze from Martha to the vampire king, pulling out a heavy bag. I've come to buy her back. This is double what I paid. Release her. Let her come home. Victor smiled, not cruel but amused. He pushed the bag back across the table. No amount of money could pay for my queen. Queen. Kyle's voice cracked. I'm staying of my own free will, Martha said calmly, adjusting the baby at her breast. Besides, I have children with Victor now. I can't leave my family. Kyle's eyes dropped to the infants, and his face went white. Children? You have... But you couldn't. He looked between them wildly. How can a vampire father children? I'm not a vampire anymore, Victor explained. Martha broke the curse of immortality. Through our combined blood, we've given hundreds of vampires the choice to become human again. To live, love, age, and die as mortals. As if summoned, Thomas and Ilara rushed in, now teenagers, calling for Martha. More children followed, all calling her mother, all seeking her attention or approval. Kyle watched, understanding dawning with devastating clarity. This woman, the one he'd dismissed as worthless, commanded the respect and love of an entire court. She'd accomplished miracles. She'd broken ancient curses. Helen appeared, placing herself protectively between Kyle and Martha. No amount you could pay can match Martha's worth. She is beyond money now, beyond price. Her voice was fierce with love. We would lay down our lives for her. Kyle stumbled back, the weight of his mistake crushing him. He'd traded love for social approval. He'd sold the most precious thing in his life for a sack of coins that now meant nothing. I loved you, he whispered. I realize that now. I loved you and I threw you away. Martha felt Victor's hand tighten on her shoulder. She looked up at her mate, at the man who'd seen her worth when no one else had, and felt peace settle over her. I hope you find happiness, Kyle, she said quietly. But it won't be with me. This is my home. These are my people. This is where I belong. Kyle left, the doubled payment still in his hands, far poorer than when he'd arrived. When the door closed behind him, Victor pulled Martha to her feet, careful of the sleeping twins. He held her close, his warm heart beating against hers. You are the best thing that has happened to me in my court, he murmured against her hair. Martha smiled, looking around at the children playing, at Helen organizing the younger ones, at the fortress that had become home. I'm finally home. Finally at peace. She was no longer defined by what she couldn't do, but celebrated for who she was. Her worth had never been tied to her womb, but to her heart. Years later, Martha stood at the same window where Victor had once watched the snowy hills with a vampire's cold stillness. Now he stood beside her, warm and alive, gray threading through his dark hair. Their twins played in the courtyard below, demonstrating unusual abilities, speed from their vampire heritage, strength from their wolf blood. Thomas, now a young man with a family of his own, supervised with paternal fondness. Helen, elderly now and planning to pass peacefully when her time came, sat in the garden with a book, enjoying the sunshine without pain for the first time in centuries. The court thrived, a blend of mortal and immortal, wolf and vampire, all living in harmony. Do you ever regret it? Martha asked, leaning into Victor's warmth. Becoming mortal? Never. He kissed her temple. Immortality was a prison. This, aging with you, watching our children grow, knowing every day is finite and therefore precious. This is living. Martha thought about the girl she'd been. Sold like property. Deemed worthless by everyone who should have loved her. And she thought about who she'd become. Queen of a court that chose her. Mother to children who adored her. Mate to a man who'd seen her true worth from the beginning. She'd been sold as worthless. But she'd become priceless. Not despite her perceived failures, but because of who she'd always been beneath them. Someone with a heart big enough to love the lost, the broken, the cursed. Someone who'd broken curses with nothing but love. As the sun set over the snowy hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Martha closed her eyes and breathed deep. She was home, she was loved, she was enough, and she always had been. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. Who was the character you couldn't stop rooting for? Most importantly, what moment made your heart skip a beat? I truly treasure reading your comments, so please, leave a piece of your thoughts behind. If you're ready for the next journey, hit subscribe so you don't miss a chapter. Until we meet again for our next story. Bye for now.